The United States has a new president. Donald Trump today took the oath of office and began his second term as president of the U.S., promising a new golden age for America. He becomes only the second person to return to the White House after losing an election. The ceremony was held inside the U.S. Capitol, where Trump supporters rampaged following his defeat just 4 years ago. This time around, Trump got straight down to business, and he signed a series of executive orders.
I will faithfully execute.
That I will faithfully execute.
The office.
This is the moment that Donald Trump is sworn in as the 47th President of the United States of America.
And will, to the best of my ability.
Cold weather forced this, the 60th inauguration, inside to the Capitol Rotunda. Today garlanded in tradition and ceremony, but just over 4 years ago, was packed with rioters decrying the legitimacy of the American electoral system. Earlier in the day, outgoing President Joe Biden received his successor at the White House. Biden told Trump, "Welcome home," as the transitional meeting dating back almost 200 years got underway. Biden and Trump traveled to the Capitol together, where former presidents and dignitaries gathered for the event. In a sign of Trump's unconventional style, a coterie of tech moguls was seated in prime position, despite a limited and competitive guest list. A little after noon in Washington, D.C., Donald Trump became the 47th president before delivering his first speech of his second term. He declared an emergency on the U.S. border with Mexico and repeated his mantra of "drill, baby, drill," before declaring America is entering a new golden age.
The golden age of America begins right now. From this day forward, our country will flourish and be respected again all over the world. We will be the envy of every nation, and we will not allow ourselves to be taken advantage of any longer. During every single day of the Trump administration, I will very simply put America first.
Trump has promised a slew of far-reaching executive orders in his first days in office, leaving America and the world in no doubt that politics have changed with Donald Trump once again the President of the United States.
Joining me now is our Washington Bureau Chief, Ines Pohl. She is at the White House. Ines, a lot to unpack here. What did you make, first of all, of the ceremony today and of Trump's inauguration speech?
I mean, Brent, you know, the big difference is really to the ceremony 4 years ago, which was actually rushed to an earlier time because there were concerns that we might see more or that they might see more riots because it was only less than 2 weeks after January 6th. Of course, today was very peaceful, very respectful, so just in a way normal, besides the fact that it was inside. His speech was basically another speech from his rallies. He has been talking about drill, baby, drill all along the campaign trail. He, of course, always talked about making America great again and America first, to put America first. So, it was not really a surprise what he was talking about, also not how he is talking. That's his style. I know that many around the world who didn't follow him so closely over the last months were a little bit surprised over his meandering way to talk, but that's just how President Donald Trump is speaking.
Did anything surprise you among the things that he brought out in his speech today?
What surprised me that he's not only reaching for the stars, but that he's reaching for Mars. He said that he wants to put stars and stripe on the planet. That, of course, was a reference to Elon Musk, whom he works very closely with. That was kind of surprising. I personally was also surprised that he repeated that he wants to rename the Gulf of Mexico into the Gulf of America, that he goes down kind of these little show business things. He said before that he does that, or that he repeats this as the sworn-in president. But that just shows you kind of his mindsets. He just wants to impress his people by showing I can basically do whatever I want, even rename the Gulf of Mexico.
We saw a lot of they've been called the big boys from Silicon Valley at today's ceremony, or the tech bros as they've been called. What does the fact that they're there, what does it tell us about their role in this new Trump administration?
Yeah, I think, this will be kind of one topic we are going to talk a lot about in the nearer future. It was pretty remarkable that these tech billionaires had better seats than his future administration. That tells you how important they are for Donald Trump, of course, because they gave him a lot of money. They probably will give him a lot of money, but they're also very influential. We see that about the debate about TikTok, how important social media is for Donald Trump. We see that how close he works, of course, with Elon Musk, but also the owner of the Washington Post, Jeff Bezos, and the owner of Amazon is close to Donald Trump. So there is some concern here in the United States that these tech giants, did you say that in English? Tech billionaires will really try to influence the political discourse and also the way we journalists are reporting. So this is something we definitely watch very closely over the next months to come.
We were watching, too, during the ceremony to see if there were any European leaders present, and the only one I could spot was the Italian Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni. The fact that it was hard to find any European leaders today, is that a signal that is being sent to American allies on this side of the Atlantic?
Milei was also there, but of course he's not from Europe. It was kind of surprising that Orban wasn't there, the Hungarian head of state. But of course, Brent, I mean, he made it also really clear in his speech that he will ask Europe to pay more money for their self-defense. That comes along with this America First approach. So it's not a coincidence that no kind of head of state from Europe was there. It's going to be a tough time for the European Union, also for our country, for Germany, to find a way to work with the Trump administration, because they have been already very, very critical about European countries. So this will be a difficult and a fine path to walk. And we shall see when the first European leader will be greeted here at the White House behind me. I mean, we all remember the good relationship from the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz with Joe Biden, or President Macron from France with Joe Biden. This will definitely be very different under this administration.
Well, we know you will be watching and following it for us. Our Washington Bureau Chief, Ines Pohl, live at the White House on this historic day. Ines, thank you. Well, our coverage continues now with Boris Vormann, professor of politics and director of the politics section at Bard College here in Berlin. It's good to see you, Boris. It's been a while. You've been a familiar face here to our viewers anytime we're talking about politics in the U.S., but especially the peaceful transfer of power that was on display today. What struck you most about today's ceremony and today's speech?
Two things. One thing is that 8 years ago, we heard a speech about American carnage. We didn't quite hear that today. It was closer to the tradition of American inauguration addresses, where the new president is saying, okay, we're facing a crisis. There needs to be unity. He spoke himself as a unifier and a peacemaker, which was perhaps somewhat of a surprise, even though at the same time, with no uncertain terms, he was criticizing Biden and Harris for corruption and incompetence, etc. So there was a lot of that as well. The other thing that, well, didn't surprise me, but that struck me was that he doubled down on the Panama Canal and his geopolitical ambitions, especially the way he couched it in this whole rhetoric of manifest destiny sounded very much like the 19th century. It sounded like the way that the U.S. behaved all the way until the Spanish-American War in 1898. Yeah. After that, there was a pivot towards geoeconomics, so this was somewhat surprising.
Yeah, we heard the president also speak of a golden age in America beginning now, a nation that he said will be respected again all over the world. Is President Trump, is he the president to deliver on that promise?
Who knows? He certainly seems to define international relations much differently from all the presidents since 1945. It is interesting that after 45, there was always an ambition to present U.S. interests as global interests, as interests of everyone else who wanted to be an ally. So the U.S. was willing and able to provide certain global public goods, infrastructure, security, elite currency. It doesn't seem to be willing to do that anymore. So we're seeing a pivot back from geoeconomics towards geopolitical questions. On the other hand, he didn't speak much about global affairs. He just said, we will not be taken advantage of and we will not be intimidated. That was about it.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I was listening to see if he was going to say anything about Ukraine, for example, and I don't think he mentioned it once during his speech. He did make several references to American exceptionalism in his speech, insisting that the U.S. will be respected all over the world. I've got a clip here from the speech I want to play where he talks about the U.S. military. Take a listen.
Like in 2017, we will again build the strongest military the world has ever seen. We will measure our success not only by the battles we win, but also by the wars that we end, and perhaps most importantly, the wars we never get into. My proudest legacy will be that of a peacemaker and unifier. That's what I want to be, a peacemaker and a unifier.
Trump, the peacemaker, Boris. I mean, was that for domestic or international consumption?
I think it was more for a domestic audience. There has been a fatigue of the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq for a long time. And there was a criticism of being engaged abroad. And there are periodic moments in American history where the U.S. sort of turns in on itself and wants to isolate itself from international affairs. So I think this was more aimed towards a domestic audience that does not want to invest in foreign borders, as Trump said, but instead wants to take care of its own borders and its own domestic affairs.
Trump said that he will again pull the U.S. out of that landmark Paris climate agreement. He said increased drilling for U.S. oil and gas will help make the U.S. richer and energy prices will drop. Do you believe he'll follow through on that?
Oh, yes, I'm pretty sure he will. And I think that's his way to keep inflation at bay, because at the same time, if he is deporting at the large scale, if he is implementing protectionist measures, I'm wondering how that would not lead to inflation. So I think expansion, territorial expansion, but also expansion in terms of growth on fossil fuels seems to be his way forward.
He also mentioned today that, again, that he wants to rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. And he also said that the U.S. Wants to take back the Panama Canal because, in his words, the Chinese are running things now. I mean, is that something that simply resonates with his base, with his supporters?
I think we're just seeing a moment where geopolitics is becoming more important again, to a dangerous degree, I think. There's a rhetoric of nationalist ambition that I think, especially when it comes to territorial questions, is reminiscent of the 19th century and early 20th century. It's interesting that he didn't mention Canada, and he didn't mention Greenland in his speech, but only the Panama Canal. And it seems like that's the low-hanging fruit, because in the contract that the U.S. made with Panama, there is a clause for the U.S. to take back the Panama Canal if it feels like it's not being open enough towards its own national interests. So I think it's not unlikely that Trump will follow through on that.
And since, we're talking about the culture wars in America, the president did say that it would be U.S. policy moving forward to recognize only two genders, men and women. That stance, is that what got him elected?
In part. I think what got him elected was, there are many things, but inflation seems to be quite an important part of the story. There is also, I think, a certain critique of the left and identity politics on the left, especially by the working class, that the Democrats seem to have lost in this entire debate, that finds that East Coast elites are moralistic and are talking down to them. So certainly that's part of the story, but it's just one factor among a number of factors.
Boris Vormann, political professor at Bard College here in Berlin. As always, Boris, good to see you. Good to get your insights. Thank you.
Good to see you, Brent. Bye.
Well, Donald Trump has promised to end undocumented entry into the United States and to deport millions of immigrants who are living in the U.S. without permission. The new president has declared a national emergency on the southern border with Mexico. And as we just said, he's vowed to rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America.
Maria has applied to enter the U.S. legally. She has been waiting for a response while living in Mexico. But with Donald Trump back in power, her chances are looking slim.
We're waiting, hoping for that appointment, every day, waiting for the surprise to come, but nothing so far.
During his campaign, Trump vowed to crack down on both legal and illegal immigration and start mass deportations. This is worrying news for undocumented migrants already in the U.S. Like Elena, a mother of two. She fears being deported to Mexico by the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, also known as ICE.
I'm a bit afraid because I think of my kids. If one day I'm apprehended by ICE, how will they find out? Who's going to pick them up from school? I believe it would be traumatic for my children.
From his first day in office, Trump wants to detain and deport unauthorized migrants. And Mexico is willing to take them in.
If they decide to return to Mexico or come to Mexico, here they are well received with open arms. Here we embrace Mexicans.
Migrant rights advocates in Mexico worry that their government might be overpromising. They are venting their frustration by taking swings at a Trump piñata.
There are many shelters here in the city of Tijuana that at some point will be overwhelmed by deportees. That's the work that the government of our country will have to do.
Migrants are bracing themselves as Trump's deportation measures threaten to uproot lives on both sides of the border.
And as we reported, President Trump went ahead with his threat to declare a national emergency at the U.S. border with Mexico.
First, I will declare a national emergency at our southern border. All illegal entry will immediately be halted, and we will begin the process of returning millions and millions of criminal aliens back to the places from which they came. We will reinstate my Remain in Mexico policy.
All right, to pick up that part of the story, I'm joined now by our correspondent, Benjamin Alvarez Gruber. He is also standing in front of the White House. Benjamin, what does this state of emergency, what does it really mean for the many undocumented migrants?
So it definitely means more uncertainty, not just for them who are trying to get into the United States, but also what that would mean for the border communities. We just heard it there in that piece that they might be overwhelmed. The big question is not only what will happen to those who are from Mexico trying to get to the U.S., but what will happen to nationals of other countries. And of course, there have been talks by the now administration of President Donald Trump with Claudia Sheinbaum, the Mexican president, and we already heard him there speaking about the Remain in Mexico policy. So some things might be new, like sending soldiers to the border, declaring this national emergency, but others, like the Remain in Mexico policy that he just mentioned, was something that President Trump implemented in his first presidency, meaning that migrants will need to wait in Mexico until they actually get an assignment and get the opportunity to go to an office to then migrate legally to the United States.
You mentioned, too, that the president said that he wants to send troops to the border with Mexico. What could we expect there?
We saw a little bit of a trailer of that in Texas because Governor Abbott, who also got a shout out by President Trump earlier today, showed how it can look like when soldiers work together with, for example, the National Guard, with Border Patrol. There's always this legal discussions to who can exercise the rights. But what President Trump is trying to do now are a couple of executive actions that he is expected to sign later today here in the Oval Office in the West Wing that you might see here right behind me. And one of them is also to help DHS, or the Department of Homeland Security, to be better prepared. So on one side, helping the offices already enforcing the deportation, sending additional soldiers to the border, and also giving DHS more tools to be quicker with those deportation as he promised it. And he called it the biggest deportation campaign in American history.
And what about future U.S. immigration policy? Was there any mention of that or announcements made by the president today?
There was already a new measure because the app that's called the CBP-1, so the Customs and Border Patrol 1, that's an app that almost 1 million migrants use to migrate legally to the United States to work here, is not active anymore, meaning that those who actually had an appointment to get there are several points of entry, so there are 8 that they could actually book with this application, is no longer possible, meaning that many of them who were actually already waiting at the border for the assignments, suddenly it popped up on the screens of their phones that the appointments had been cancelled, and that this app that was also strengthened during the previous administration of President Biden is no longer active. So we're seeing immediate action even before signing these executive orders, showing that there are many policies that Donald Trump wants to get through on one of his main topics, that is migration.
DW's Benjamin Alvarez Gruber reporting tonight from the White House. Benjamin, thank you.